I was sipping coffee on my porch when I noticed the envelope. Thick paper, HOA letterhead, bold red stamp, urgent action required. Now, I've lived in this neighborhood long enough to know that any envelope with more than one staple is probably nonsense, but I opened it anyway. Inside was a notice that read like a ransom letter from a very bored bureaucrat. Due to unapproved structural additions and violations of HOA aesthetic standards, you are hereby ordered to remove the unlicensed cabin structure within 72 hours or face escalating daily fines and legal action. At first I laughed. Then I read it again. They were talking about my cabin, a hand-built pinewood haven I constructed over the past 2 years with my own 2 hands, sweat, and an unreasonable number of trips to the hardware store. A cabin that sat 20 feet behind my house on land I owned outright, surrounded by trees, out of view from the street, and entirely within zoning codes. Apparently, the HOA decided that because it wasn't listed on the original plot map, and because it hadn't been approved for harmonious neighborhood visibility, it had to go. Harmonious neighborhood visibility, by the way, is HOA speak for Karen doesn't like the rustic vibe. And I knew exactly which Karen this was. 3 doors down, always watering her fake grass, always peering over fences like a hawk with a mortgage. The same Karen who once rode me up for storing unsightly wood, a huck of firewood, in a backyard fire pit. So of course, she'd have a problem with a cabin that looked like it belonged in a Yellowstone spin-off. But what really got me was the 72-hour deadline. No discussion, no hearing, just an order to destroy something I loved, under threat of fines, penalties, and legal harassment. I called Dale, the HOA president. He answered like he was on a conference call with God. "Hi, this is Dale, HOA executive chair. What can I do for you?" I skipped the pleasantries. "Dale, I just got this cabin demolition order. You want to explain what's going on?" He sighed. "Look, it's not personal, but several board members raised concerns. It's about community cohesion." "Cohesion?" I ask. "It's 20 feet from the nearest house. Who's it bothering?" "Raccoons." "There's protocol," he said, "and unfortunately, you didn't follow it." "And now you're giving me 72 hours? "It's standard," he said. "It's garbage," I replied, and hung up. I stormed out to the cabin and sat inside. Sunlight filtered through the trees. A breeze passed through the open window. The smell of pine, varnish, and fresh earth hit me like a memory. And that's when I remembered something my grandfather once told me. "They may push you around, but they can't push you off what's yours." That stuck with me. Because this land, it wasn't just mine sentimentally, it was mine legally. And suddenly, something clicked. I walked back inside, pulled out the old deed and land records from my office drawer, and started flipping. Page after page. Boundary lines. Land use agreements. Old leases. Then I saw it. A footnote buried in 8-point font. Parcel 37C, to be reserved under grandfathered lease agreement with local community association, subject to renewal at landowner's discretion. Parcel 37C, wait a second. That was the same parcel the HOA clubhouse sat on, and the tennis courts, and the community garden they always bragged about in newsletters. It was all built on my land. Land they'd been leasing from my grandfather for $1 a year. A courtesy, not a right. In that lease, it expired last month. Suddenly, the 72-hour ultimatum didn't feel so threatening. Because they wanted to play hardball? But I had just found the bat. I sat at my desk staring at that lease agreement like I'd just found the holy grail of revenge. Parcel 37C expired and never renewed. All these years, The HOA had been enjoying my land like it was theirs, hosting cookouts, morning yoga, garden club tea parties. Karen herself hosted her daughter's baby shower in the HOA clubhouse last spring, complete with a bouncy castle on my grass. And they had the audacity to threaten my cabin? Game on. I dusted off my old file cabinet and pulled every document related to the lease. My grandfather was meticulous. Copies of the original agreement, renewal requests, handwritten notes, even photos of the land before the HOA laid down the tennis courts. There it was again, in ink and signature. The continuation of this lease shall be reviewed annually at the discretion of the landowner. And no one had reviewed it since my grandfather passed away, which meant, legally, they were squatters. I made 2 phone calls the next day, to a real estate attorney named Marla. She was a bulldog with a Bluetooth earpiece who spoke in court citations and sarcasm. Loved her instantly. The other was to a surveyor, just to make sure nothing had changed in the past few decades. Spoiler, it hadn't. By the time I had everything documented, notarized, and certified, I was grinning like a villain in the 3rd act of a heist movie. Because here's the thing about HOA power. It's only scary if you don't know how to fight back. And they never imagined someone like me, quiet, solo, fire pit guy, would have the leverage to flip the entire board upside down. So I did what any reasonable person would do. I drafted a termination of courtesy lease. Then I attached a new lease offer, valid immediately, with the following terms. $3,000, 0 cents per month for continued use of Parcel 37C. Strict noise curfews after 8 p.m. Advance notice required for all events. No subleasing or rental of community clubhouse. Backdated charges, applicable since last lease expiration. Total due immediately to avoid eviction, $9,000, 0 cents. Oh, and I gave him 72 hours to respond. Poetic, right? I hand-delivered the envelope to Dale myself. Watched his face go from HOA smug to, oh no, 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 oh no, in 2.4 seconds. You're bluffing, he said, pale. Not even a little, I smiled. Karen just happened to be walking her Pomeranian past the HOA office when I left. She tried to sneer. I tipped my hat. A lovely day for a rent hike, I said. She blinked like I'd slapped her with a tax bill. Back home, I fired up the grill, cracked a cold one, and waited. Sure enough, by sunset, the neighborhood Facebook group was on fire. Is the clubhouse really getting shut down? Why are we paying thousands in back rent? Who even owns that land? I posted a picture of the original deed with a caption. Just a friendly reminder, know who you're threatening before you issue ultimatums. I slept like a baby that night. Because when someone threatens to take down your cabin, you don't just rebuild. You build a bigger rent bill. I woke up the next morning to an HOA panic spiral. Dale had called an emergency board meeting. They tried to play it off like a land usage clarification session, but everyone knew what was going down. By noon, the clubhouse parking lot was full. People were arguing on the lawn, and I could hear someone shout, "Wait, this whole time it wasn't ours?" Meanwhile, I was inside my cabin, sipping coffee, watching it all unfold like a suburban soap opera. I had a front row seat to their meltdown, and I wasn't about to look away. Karen was pacing outside with a stack of printed bylaws like they were going to protect her from reality. She even waved one at my window. I waved back with a copy of the updated lease. By 2 p.m., Dale showed up at my door, hat literally in hand. "We need to talk." I opened the door and leaned against the frame. "Clock's ticking, Dale. You've got, 36 hours left now?" "We don't have that kind of money just lying around," he said. "Can we negotiate?" I paused. pretending to think real hard. Well, I suppose you could start with an apology." He looked at me like I'd asked him to eat dirt, but eventually he muttered, "We were wrong. About the cabin, about the land. It won't happen again." "Good start," I said. "Now, about that rent." He handed me a counter-offer. Low rate, extended timeline, no back charges. It was cute. I handed it right back. "This isn't a yard sale, Dale. I gave you a deadline. You gave me one first, remember?" He nodded, defeated. "I'll take it back to the board." That night, they voted to pay. It wasn't unanimous. Karen voted no, of course, but the majority knew they didn't have a choice. The clubhouse was too valuable to lose. Tennis season was coming up. The book club needed a place to gossip, and Karen couldn't very well host her weekly wine and wine Wednesdays in her own house, not with that ugly linoleum. The check came the next morning. Full amount. Back rent included. It felt good. Not just because I'd won, but because I'd won without stooping. They tried to strong-arm me, and I met them with paperwork, patience, and the power of actual ownership. I kept the check framed in my office, right next to the original lease from 1974. The cherry on top, I sent them a formal letter confirming the updated lease and attach an application for them to fill out before scheduling any events on my land, with a required 14-day notice. Karen stopped waving at me after that. Actually, she stopped acknowledging I existed altogether, which was fine by me, because my cabin, still standing. And now it stood for something bigger. Boundaries. Not just physical ones, but the kind that say, you don't get to bully people just because you think you're in charge. The HOA had learned that lesson the hard way. And me? I learned that when someone tries to tear down what you've built, sometimes the best revenge is reminding them they're living on borrowed ground. The fallout came fast and furious. After the rent check cleared, the mood at HOA meetings shifted, like someone had cut the power to their smug little echo chamber. No more aggressive votes, no more surprise fines. Just a whole lot of sheepish looks and motion to adjourn. Dale started calling me Mr. Reynolds instead of Buddy. Karen? She vanished from public view like a disgraced reality TV star. Her Facebook group, Preserve Our Property Values, quietly rebranded to Positive Vibes Neighborhood Chat. The only post for weeks was a photo of a squirrel eating a croissant. My inbox, however, was suddenly very busy. People from the neighborhood started emailing me to ask, "How did you do it? What were the steps? Can you look at my deed?" Even people who once sided with the HOA wanted to know if they could leverage old boundaries or hidden clauses to protect their sheds, gardens, or in one case, a koi pond shaped like the Batman logo. I didn't become the HOA guru on purpose, but I wasn't about to ignore an opportunity to teach people their rights. So I put together a short guide, How Not to Get Steamrolled by Your HOA, and emailed it out, free of charge, with diagrams. Funny thing happened next. People actually started standing up to the board. One guy refused to repaint his shutters. Another couple reinstalled their swing set. Someone even dared to park their RV in the driveway for a whole weekend. And through it all, the HOA just backed off. Because once the illusion of power cracks, it shatters fast. When people realize the bylaws aren't holy scripture, and that landowners actually have a say, the fear disappears. And when the fear disappears, Karen loses her magic. One evening, I was locking up the cabin when I saw a young couple walking their dog. The guy smiled. "Hey, just wanted to say thanks for what you did." I raised an eyebrow. "For? You know, not letting them push you around. We've been here 6 months. and already got 2 violation letters. After what you did, they stopped showing up. I nodded, glad to hear it. He paused. Also, love the cabin. Looks like it belongs in a Clint Eastwood movie. I grinned. Appreciate that. The truth is, I didn't build the cabin to fight anyone. I built it for peace. Solitude. A space where I could be myself, without someone measuring my lawn height or critiquing my mailbox font. But sometimes, peace has to be defended. Sometimes, the quietest person on the block is the one holding the deed. And now, every time I sit in that cabin, with the light filtering through the trees and the smell of pine in the air, I know something the HOA didn't. You can't rent integrity. You can't fine someone into surrender. And you definitely can't bulldoze someone who owns the ground you're standing on. Spring turned into summer, and life in the neighborhood settled into a new rhythm. One with fewer letters taped to doors and a lot more cautious silence from the HOA. Nobody dared mention the cabin again, let alone suggest tearing it down. The kicker? A few weeks later, I received an envelope in the mail. No HOA seal this time, just a plain white letter with the return address I didn't recognize. Inside was a short note. We're stepping down from our HOA positions, effective immediately. A new election will be held at the end of the month. Thank you for reminding us what real leadership looks like. Signed, Dale and 2 other board members. No Karen, of course. She didn't believe in surrender, but even she knew when the tide had turned. Last I heard, she'd applied to join a different HOA across town. Good luck to them. And the cabin? I made a few upgrades. Added solar panels, a better chimney, even built a small deck. People started calling it Reynolds Refuge. Someone made a joke about putting it on Airbnb, but I told them that kind of peace isn't for sale. One night, I hosted a small get-together for the neighbors who'd supported me. We grilled, laughed, and told war stories from the HOA front lines. It wasn't a big crowd, but it was real, honest, and not a clipboard in sight. As the sun set behind the trees, casting long golden shadows across my land, I leaned back in my chair and took it all in. The birds were chirping, the fire pit was crackling. My cabin stood strong, right where it belonged. This whole ordeal reminded me of something my grandfather once said, back when I was too young to understand it. When you own the land, you set the rules. But when you stand up for it, that's when you earn the respect. I get it now. So, to anyone out there dealing with a power-hungry HOA, a Karen on a mission, or just plain unfair treatment, remember this. Know your rights, hold your ground, and don't let anybody evict you from what's rightfully yours. Thanks for listening to my story. If you've got your own HOA horror tale, or better yet, a victory, drop it in the comments below. And hey, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell so you don't miss the next ridiculous chapter in suburban warfare. Because when you fight smart, even the smallest cabin can shake an entire neighborhood.